Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Decryption and I hope you are well. Travelling on boats and planes and stuff is a very popular thing in a lot of open world games. Games like Assassin's Creed used to let you get on a boat so you could travel across. I believe it was like 3 or something. GTA uses taxi services and you can also get on trains and planes. It's a great way to bridge huge parts of your map together without having to make the player travel. So in my case, I have this middle ground here, which is eventually going to be upgraded and be the main central place. But you are sometimes going to want to go back to the open place over here, and it's purposely for the story separated away. There is a story coming up later where eventually you'll like scale some mountains at the back and it'll be a horrible grueling task kind of thing, but then you'll invade them from behind. For majority of the gameplay, you need some way of accessing and travelling all the way across it. Now, I don't want to add the whole boat thing into my game where the player can get in a boat, drive it, avoid other boats. That's not what the game is. So in today's tutorial, we're going to replicate the very common boat train thing where we can walk across to this boat, activate it, and then the boat man, the ship captain, whatever, will travel the boat, it will fly all the way down here to the correct place, and it will arrive at the correct dock over here so you can get in and out of it. So let's get started. So the first thing I need to do, if you watched my previous tutorial about blocking off areas, is this boat has some horrible collision on it. I don't know why it's so bad. So if you press Alt-C on your keyboard, you'll actually activate collision view on Unreal. And if you've got a game of the size of mine, it will lag while it does it, but it'll basically show you every single collision. So you can see this boat here has these horrible spheres around it, which is blocking the player getting in. So I'm going to press Alt-C to undo that. It is quite intensive to do that. So if I come and open this boat, let's go and fix the collision on. So you see in here, we've got a fairly largish boat. And if I go to show collision, you'll see this is massive capsules that are trying to beat the collision on it. For sometimes this might work. For my game, this is not going to work because I need you to get on the boat. So there are a few ways we can fix this to basically add better collision to it. Now, if this was a static mesh, we could actually just change all of the collision on here. But because it's a skeletal mesh, Unreal wants to use its physics in order to drive things here. Now we can get into trying to make this all work and shrinking it all down, but that's going to take a while to get this properly because I want the player to be able to walk inside it and not get over the lip here, which is going to be a bit difficult to do as is. Now I don't need this to have perfect collision, so what I'm actually going to do instead is I'm going to convert this to a static mesh and have the skeletal mesh be the visuals of it, but with no collision, and the static mesh be an invisible mesh, but only drive the collision. So I'm just going to come up to the top and say actor, and then convert boat to static mesh. Now it does keep the original one, so don't worry about that. And I'm going to put it in my Elven custom pack, and I will just call this SKM for static mesh, vehicle boat 01. And now we have a static mesh of the boat that we can improve the collision on. So if I go to show simple collision, you see it's not got anything, so we're all good. If I go to complex collision, you see it's highlighted everything almost perfectly. So I'm going to keep it as complex collision for now, and we can disable it and enable it when we need to if we want the performance gains. Equally, I could take this into Blender, which is something I might do off screen to be fair, cut the heavy bits off that I don't need collision, like the mast and the big flag wind thing. I'm not a boat person. And then make it so it's a bit lighter on collision. So instead of using all of these polygons, it's just like a simple box. But for now, complex collision works for me. So I'm going to scroll down the details until I see collision. And where it says complex collision, and where it says collision complexity, I'm just going to change this to use complex as simple, which means in the world it will now use this. So now I can come back to the boat and I can set its collision to be nothing. So now that we've got another way of doing the boat's collision, which will be a lot nicer, I can now turn this into a blueprint. So I'm going to come to my blueprints folder, and inside vehicles, I'll just create a new folder called travel boat, and I'll create my blueprint inside here, type of actor called BP underscore travel boat, and I'll open it up. The first thing I'll do is I'll add our skeletal mesh. So we've got the visuals. So I'll just come to it and press Ctrl B to highlight it. I'll go back to the blueprint window and I can instantly add the skeletal mesh like so. And then now what I'm also going to do is come and find the custom mesh for the collision. I'm going to click it and I'm going to also add the static mesh like so. So now you can see both of them. So let's make it so only one is collision, the other's not visible. So I'm going to click the boat for the skeletal mesh and I'm going to scroll down to collision and I'm just going to disable all of it. So no collision, we don't need it, we don't need anything. But on the skeletal mesh, but on the static mesh, we want it all ticked like so. And then I'm going to scroll down to hidden in game and I'm just going to tick it. And then I'm also going to untick visible as well. So now you see, we can't see the boat, but it should still retain its collision, blocking us if we try to get onto it. So I'm going to come back to my boat here, and I realise I have scaled it up to double the size, because if I keep it as 1, it's too small, isn't it? So I'm going to come back to our BP, and I'm just going to scale this up to, and you should only have to scale the parent, you shouldn't have to scale the child boat, it should scale with it, so it would be 1 relative to the parent, which is 2, so it should be 2. You can also test this if you just come and untick visible. See, it's the same size. So if we compile and save that for now, Control B to open our blueprint, and then back on our world, if I right click this mesh, replace with travel boat. So you can see it's all there now. If I start my game, I should now be free to jump on the boat and explore it without the collisions running into issues. So I've just unlocked the boat, and he's restored the ferry. And now you can see I can successfully walk on the boat, and it is all here. How cool is that? And I love the fact it's scaled up so it actually looks like a big boat, which looks really nice. Now, there are of course some things we can fix on it, like we can stop it so we can climb over the walls and stuff. Maybe you want that, who knows? The other thing I might look at fixing eventually is this bit here. I want to be able to walk up these steps, but you can't because this bit at the top is ever so too big. And the way I do that is just put a plane there, or, you know, walk up very skillfully, the little handle things there. That works too. So now we have our boat. The next step is to actually start the interaction for it. So how do we begin the travel process? Now, there's a couple of ways you can actually do this. You can make it so you can put seats here, and when you go up and interact with the seat, it sits down and it tells it to do it. You can make it a timed thing, so as long as you're on the boat for X amount of time, it works. You can make it so you go up and you tell the ship to start moving. Either way. The way I'm going to do it for now, I think, is if you come onto the boat, and if you interact with basically anything on the boat, it'll say, interact, or, you know, start travel process. So you're going to need some form of interaction system. We've talked about these loads of times in the past, whether you use narrative interaction, which is what I'm going to do, or you have a custom built one like my previous starter tutorial where we fire a raycast to do it, where we fire a line cast to do it, or you have another custom one like I think Ninja's got one now or something. Either way, that's what we need to do to make this boat interactable. So the setup for the interaction might be a little bit different, but the code should be generic for you to use. So I'm going to come over to my narrative interactions folder because that's what I'm using, and I'm basically going to create a new narrative interaction component, interactable component. And basically this is how I store interactions. So I don't necessarily code the interaction on the boat, I code it in a component and then I can reuse it in multiple places if I need to. So I'm just going to call this interactable travel boat. And I'll open it up. So I'll have a blueprint that looks like normal. If yours is coded directly onto it with an interface or something, do the same thing. So for me, when I interact with it, it will be on interact. So the first thing I want to do is say, is the boat busy? Because if it's busy, it's already doing something. Well, we don't want to necessarily be redoing it or messing up with it. So there is a bunch of ways you can do this. You can use gameplay tags. You can use booleans to drive the states and stuff like that. However, I've already got a gameplay tag system set up where things check if something else is busy, then it won't use it. So I'm going to reuse that on mine. So in the variables, I'm just going to come and add gameplay tags. And I'll search for a gameplay tag container. And then I will first drag off the gameplay tags on interact. I will do a query. So does container match tag query? Back off the tag query, I will do make search for match for any tags. So does this tag exist? I'll drag off the tags and do make gameplay tag from container, and I will simply add my is busy tag. So this will tell us whether or not this boat is currently busy. So if it is busy, true, then what do we want to do when the boat's busy, it's moving? Well, nothing, so we'll just ignore that. False, however, if it's not busy, then we can now successfully set it to be busy. So I'm going to add the gameplay tags and do add gameplay tag, and then connect it to false and set it busy. However, if you don't want to do the gameplay tags route, just do a boolean. That works. I may have extra functionality on the boat eventually. Maybe we look at boat, battles or something. Let me know if you want to see something like that. One other thing I'm going to do on my interactions, so this is just if you tell something to interact with it. But what I can also do is take this exact query here and override my function can interact, which most interaction systems will have something like this as well. And all this does is also say whether or not the UI should say you can interact with. So in my case, I'm going to keep the parent doing its own thing, because then that will check if you're currently doing other things, if something else is. But I'm also going to come and say, and it does not contain the isBusy tag. And then I will return true, which basically means as long as the parent and the boat doesn't contain the busy tag, it will allow you to interact with it. If the parent says you can't for some reason, it will return some error text. So if the parent says you can't do it, then it will come over here and say you can't do it. However, I'm going to make a bit of space here and add a branch in and then plug this one into it. If this is true, then we can simply return from here like so and say the boat is busy, to say they can't interact with it. But if it's false, then we'll let the parent check by normal. And if the parent returns true, then it means they can interact with it. So back to the event graph, we can now interact with the boat here. So what do we actually want to do? Well, we want it to lock the player down so they can't move, they can't do anything. Eventually, we'll add some animations to make them sit down or something like that. I don't know. We'll figure that bit out. So for now, I'm going to get the interaction component from over here. So let's make some space and just tidy this up a little bit. Because I believe, at least with my interaction system, eventually it will be updated to allow NPCs to use interactions as well. So I'll just mark this as check if boat is busy. That'll just prevent anyone calling interact. So I'm going to come and get the interactor, which is the pawn that I started the interaction. I'm going to drag it off and press R to create some gaps. So the first thing I'm going to do is just check, is this player controlled? So is player controlled? And this basically will say, is it an NPC or not? So we'll add the branch in. If it is player controlled, we can just drag off of this and do get controller. And then I can cast this to the player controller. And then from the player controller, I can just call disable input like so. And then I can pass in the player controller double time like that. That'll disable the player controller from allowing you to do anything. You may need to pick and choose which input you want to disable. This is just a generic quick thing. If you've got an ability to say pause it still and stuff like that, use a gameplay tag with is busy or something. But I want to also disable my pawns collision because they may have... I want to disable my pawns controls because they may have something else. So I'll drag off of that as well, and I will just do disable input. I'm also going to drag from the pawn and just plug it straight into the disable input as well, which makes it look a little bit messy, but all it basically does is disable the input on the player controller, so for anything you've put on there, and then disable anything on the pawn as well. Because it's common to have your input split, so the player controller may drive things like the pause menu, the inventory screen, but the pawn for a player would control movement, jumping, but in a car, the pawn would be driving and stopping. If it's not player controlled, then for now, we will just get off the pawn and we'll do get AI controller, and we will drag off and simply do stop logic. Then we will get the brain component, and then we will simply call stop to basically stop them from moving around, wanting to do anything. And we'll say the reason is on a boat. So we'll wrap this in a comment saying disable player /NPC. And then the final thing we need to do is we really should attach the player to the boat. Because if this boat starts moving, the player's physics are going to cause them to be shoot backwards and then maybe eventually glitch out, and that's not what. So whoever it is, player or NPC, we want to attach them to the boat. So I'm going to go and get the owner, which will in my case get the boat, because this is where the interaction component will be set. Then I will drag off and do attach actor to actor. And I'll connect both of these up to it. And then for the get owner, I'm going to move that to the parent actor, like so. And then for the target, I basically need this pawn again. So I'm actually just going to come and promote this to a variable called interactor, but I'm going to mark it as private so we can't see it anywhere, because I'm not a fan of all these lines. Now I can delete these lines and I can make it a bit nicer, like so. But now I can drag the interactor over here as the target. I can connect them up to it. I can make this line a little bit neater just by dragging this one up. So look, now we don't bypass through it as such. And then I'm going to keep all this relative for now, but we very well may have to come back and adjust this, but that's fine. So for now, we'll drag off this and do attach actor to boat to, and of course you can do trains, anything you want. So let's give this a test and see how we are faring at the moment. So what I'm expecting is when we attach this to the boat, we can walk up to it. It will offer us interact with the boat. We can then interact with it as long as the boat's not busy. It will then disable the NPC or the player and attach us to it, so we are basically static. So if we move the boat, the player should move. The only other thing I'm going to do before we test it is just go to class defaults and give it some details. So on here, the interactable name is boat, the action text is travel, and then I'll just keep it. I'll hit compile and save, then we go back to our travel boat, and I can now add the interactable component. There we go. So let's give this a quick go and see how we fare now. So now if I walk up, it's going to tell me the ferry's open. I can come in, and if I look at the middle part or I look at a part of it, it says, do I want to travel on the boat? If I press E, oh, something weird has happened. So it seems to have teleported me somewhere really random, and I think that's to do with the attachment. So the random teleportation and the errors, I think is something to do with here. So when we keep relative, it will take our current location, keep us in that position on the boat. So what I mean is on this boat, if I'm not a child of this boat, this guard here is currently at minus 15,000. If I attach him into the boat as none, his position doesn't become minus 15,000 anymore, it becomes 670. But if I change this back to 15,000, you'll see he is somewhere very mysterious. He's all the way over there, and I think that's what's happened when we've kept it to relative. So let's undo that guy, and instead of keeping it relative, let's keep it to the world, which basically recalculates it and says wherever they are in the world, recalculate that to local position. And I'll do that for all things. Final change to the scale, compile and save. Let's give it a try now. So I accidentally punched the guard and, well, killed him. Oops, didn't mean to do that. But if I jump into the boat now, you can see when he shuts up talking, I can now travel. So if we activate it, you can see the boat is now busy. I cannot move. Perfect. That is us locked into the boat. And of course, we can have other NPCs that will eventually do it. I'll add some ladders here or something eventually. I don't. But they are there. Eventually, we can activate animations if there's special seats we can say only interact with. But for now, we now have them locked in. So now that we can lock our player into the boat, the next step is to actually start getting the boat to move. So I need this boat to move to a specific position. Now there's loads of different ways we can do this, depending on how complicated your game is. In my game, this boat only has 3 places it can go to. This port here, there will eventually be a port down here with these other boats travelling around, but I haven't, fixed it yet. And then the other place is this Elven Kingdom over here. There may potentially be some more room around here eventually, but for now, I only want it to be... So you could add a plane around here and a nav mesh and basically treat it as a character. You've all seen the Fallout 3 thing where they wanted a train for one of the missions, so they just made a character with a train head, scaled the character down, and it just runs across the tracks, but you don't see it. That's an option you can do, and absolutely that will work. However, in my case, I don't need it to be that flexible and that dynamic. With it being a character, it can stop, it can start, it can do everything it needs. I don't need it to be that complex. I just want this to go to one of these positions. So what I'm going to do is actually set up a couple of splines between each point. So from here to there, and then from there to there, and then we could do one more from there to there if I really wanted to, but I'm not too worried about that side yet. So from there to there and back, that's it. So what I'm actually going to do is set up a generic spline where it comes out of here as a loop, it swings around all the way over to here, and then somehow, that boat disappears. It'll pull up alongside here, and the spline will perfectly loop and tell it to come back over here, which it will fly down here and pull up to here, and in which case we know the boat has ended. It'll be one circuit if you wish. So I'm going to come back to my boat blueprints vehicles folder, and I'm just going to create a blueprint next to it because it's going to be used right next. Actor, and I will call it BP Travel Spline. And you may have noticed I didn't call it boat, and it's because it kind of got me thinking that you could do this with trains as well. You could do it really with anything, and I very well may use this spline again in a future thing. Say if we have some advanced elven railway or, or a cart, that's another. So on this travel spline here, I'm just going to come and add a spline and I'll hit compile and save. I'll now drag this travel spline into the world and roughly position it where I need it to be, which is there. I'll hide the boat temporarily. And you'll see we have the spline point here, so I can click it and let's start the circuit. So I'm going to rotate this around so it starts that way. And now is the case, we just basically make the spline do its thing. So we'll click on the end dot to make sure we grab that one. And I'm basically just going to move it into position so you can see it goes along there. If you want to add another point, we absolutely can. So instead of stretching it straight out, I'm going to move it a bit. I'll hold Alt and drag it from that point. And you'll see it will add a nice little curve to it in which we can now balance off just to get a nice takeoff from it. And now I'm just going to essentially create a loop from this place where it needs to turn around. Because if you imagine a boat is going to be quite hefty to turn around, like so. And then we can make it travel all the way back up here. And you can keep tapping F to jump to the place you want. And then, well, in my case, the boat's going to have to do a very good loop right here to turn around and pull up roughly to these dots. We're going to absolutely have to adjust the spline's position in order to allow it to pull up where it needs to be in the docks correctly. So I'm going to make some gap over here, and I'm going to end it right there, like so. Now, you might be thinking, aren't I going to carry on down there? And I'm actually not going to, because otherwise we're not going to be able to tell when the boat reaches this destination to stop off at this point. So I'm just going to do basically a bunch of mini splines for each stopping point. So from there down to here is point 1. Eventually it will go from here down to here and it will come all the way down here to go to point 2. But if we keep the splines separate like that, then at least we won't ever have boats crashing into each other if we have 2 boats on the go, which are planning to have a few boats going around. So I have no idea if that's in the right position yet, but it's obviously a good start. So whilst I'm here, I'll rename it to travel spline _ Elven custom to Elven home, that's the custom version, that's the home. Then I'm going to come and add another travel spline and roughly position it in the same place. We'll make it fade into the starting point, but because you'll be on the boat, you probably won't see it that often. And then I can rotate this around like so. And now, again, I can do the process where the boat comes out. I'll hold Alt to add a new spline point. You'll see it's glitched backwards a little bit there. You want to get rid of that because we're going to follow the spline. And then I can basically just make it do the same path, but a different place. So you'll see different things. And I think this place here would be a pretty good one if bandits want to jump on the boat and then you have a battle. Just like a mini game for taking the travel. It's a risk, And then I'm just basically going to roughly align these up again like that. So the boat roughly stops and starts in the same position. Doesn't need to be pinpoint accurate. And then I can rename this one to the same thing, travel spline, but from Elven home to Elven custom. Basically, I've got the 2 destinations, so I can see what I'm looking at. So if I ever need to see the spline between this point, I can do it like so. And now it looks like one continuous track, which is exactly what we want. So now we need a way of telling this boat which splines it can take when it's at a specific area. So for example, in this area, it's only got 1 spline it can take, which is fine. But when he gets over here, he's technically got 2 splines he can take. He can go back to the Elven custom one, which is fine. Or he can now travel down here to the Badlands, potentially, if he wants to. I haven't done that spline yet. But it raises an issue that we need an ability for a boat to determine which area it's going to, and then which splines in said area it can go to. Now, we could just technically hardcode this and say, if you're in this area, you can take these splines. If you're in that area, you take these ones. And every boat does that. But you very well may have it sometimes where a small boat can get through here, but a warship, and maybe you can take a warship because you're going to battle or something, I don't know. But it gives us the ability to just that little bit more flexible. So what I'm going to do, in order to determine which areas a boat can take, so what I'm going to do is come into my structs folder, where I store my structure, and I'll right-click Blueprint Structure, and I'll call it S_travel location, and I'll open it up. So the first thing I'll do is state the location, so I'll just use a location tag, which I'm going to use a gameplay tag for mine. You can use an enum or even just text if you really want to. And then from that location tag, I'm going to add available splines, and I'll add our BP spline mesh, but I'm going to set it to soft object reference. So it may not be loaded in, If it's removed from memory, for instance, or we're far away from it, then we can just disable it. So travel spline, and I'll just set it to a soft object reference, just so it's not always loaded in memory. It's only loaded in memory when we choose it. And you can, of course, add some other bits to there if you think of anything. Maybe it's a specific time it can only take splines. That's another option. I'm also going to set the splines to an array, just so we can add multiple. Now, back on our BP travel boat, I will add a new variable called available locations, and I'll set this to our new S travel location. And I'll just set it to an array. I'll make it instance editable. And now you'll see if I click on the boat, I can add the locations. So I'll say for the location tag of, where are we? We are in the Elven custom to Elven home. The available splines is really only going to be the Elven custom to Elven home. But if we add another one, and the area is now Elven home to Elven custom, so we're over there, the correct spline point to use is Elven home to Elven custom. But I can easily add another one if they need to go to that destination. So I will also go back to my boat, and I'm going to give it a current location. And this will simply just be a single variable of a gameplay tag. And this is going to be easy for us to justify where it is. So the current location of this boat is the custom one. So when we start needing to travel the boat and pick the spline, we can look up the current area, find it in this list, and then pick the current one we need, and then randomize the spline it takes. So in this instance, we will Elven custom will go to this one, we'll randomly pick one, which will this one, and it can go that way. It does also give you the ability if you want to create multiple splines to the same area. So now let's actually start the boat traveling. So on the travel boat here, I'm going to come and delete all these events off and just add a custom one called start travel. So we'll do exactly what we've just said. We need to find the current location. So I'm going to create a function called get random available location. I'm going to loop over all of the current locations, and then I will break, and I will say if the location tag equals our current location, then we can add a branch to it, and then we can randomly get an array item from the list of available locations. So I'll drag off the true and do return, and I can connect this async actor into there like so. The out item I will rename to travel location, and now this little function will loop over and give us one to do. If for some reason it can't find it, then what I'm actually going to do is just return nothing, and then we'll deal with it later, because potentially we've traveled to an area we really shouldn't have, and it means there's just a little bit of flaw in our logic. So back on the event graph, I will get a random location. I will check if this is valid, because if it's not valid, then we've returned the false like we said. And then I will drag off of this and do async load asset, which will now load it into memory. And then I will also drag off and do resolve, so we can actually get the reference to it. And now you can see we've got a ptravel spline object. So I'm now going to promote this to a variable. So we've got our current spline, and I'll connect this to completed. I will also make it private because we don't need to be exposed to it. And then I'm going to come and add in the event. Now, before anybody says it, yes, I know tick can be bad when it's used in the wrong terms. However, in this case, we need the boat to move from one location to another. A tick. It's going to tick each frame and gradually move the ship along, which is exactly what we need. You could, of course, use a timeline. You have to get flexible with the timeline's length per spline. So what I mean is this spline from here, where it goes round all the way up, is much longer than this one down here. So the first thing I'm going to do is just make sure current spline is valid, because if it's not valid, we shouldn't be moving at all because we don't know where we're going. Then I'm also going to check if the boat currently is busy. So I'm going to take in the Interactable, and I'm going to say gameplay tags, and I'm going to do exactly what we did before and say does contain a match tag query, and I will do make any tags, and then finally do by a tag container from tag. And I'm going to make sure that the boat is successfully marked as busy, which means we've interacted. So we are also going to disable tick from running until we're actually ready to run it. But basically what this does is if somebody or something accidentally marks this as ticked to start running, it won't run and cause loads of errors. So we'll just do final validation, it can still run. If it's not valid, then I'm just going to disable tick. So I'll just make some space, and I'll set the actors ticked enabled to unticked, and I'll also do it on false as well. So if something marks this as being able to tick, it won't work. However, after here, right at the top, I will start the ticking running like so. And then if it's true, this is where we can now start moving the boat. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the current delta seconds. So I'm going to press R to move that across. And then I'm going to multiply this. And then this is going to be the boat's speed. So I'm going to promote this to a variable called boat travel. Actually, I'll just call it travel. I'll make it visible. And by default, I'll just set it to something like 1,000 and we'll see what that does. But this gives you ability to make smaller ships move faster, larger ships move slower. I'm then going to take this and I'm going to add it to the current location along the spline. So if you imagine right at the start is 0, if it moves 1,000 units, it may be here. So we need to remember that it's currently moved 1,000 units. So I'm going to promote this to a variable called current distance along spline. And I'll mark this as private because we don't really need to see this one anywhere. So now we've got how fast it moves and then adding it onto the current location. I'm then going to set this new one to the new custom destination like so. And then I'm going to do set actor location and rotation. The location we need to populate from the current distance. So I will grab the current spline and then I will drag off and do get location at distance along spline. And then this one is very specific because it allows you to pass in a float value. And that is going to be our current distance along the spline. Then we're going to connect the locations together. Now, the only other thing we need to do is make the boat actually face it. So I'm going to drag off the spline and do get rotation at distance along spline. The exact same thing, we pass it in and it gives us the rotation value that we need to look at. And then this, in theory, should keep ticking and ticking and ticking until we reach the end of the destination. Next, we need to tell when the boat has officially arrived at the end of the spline. So this is super simple. Drag in the current distance and drag in the current spline. Get the spline's length, and that'll tell us the distance of the full length of the spline. And we will say if the current distance is more than or equal to the length, so has it arrived at the end, then we will plug it in like so. If it's false, it needs to keep going because it's not done yet. If it's true, for now, we'll just set tick enabled and we'll set it to false. So it basically freezes the boat. And after this is where we can enable the player again. So now all we need to do before we can test it is actually tell it to run the start travel and set itself to busy. So back on the Interactable we set up earlier, does it set itself to busy? It does, so it sets itself to busy, so we're all good. But then it needs to actually start it checking the travel boat. So after it's attached to player and it's done everything it needs, I'm going to get the owner. And whilst we could cast to the travel boat, we may be using this for trains and stuff going forwards. So what I'm actually going to do instead is add an interface so we can use any blueprint really. So don't worry about interfaces, they're super easy. If I go to my interfaces folder, vehicles, that'll do. Blueprint interface, I'll call it BPI underscore travel vehicle. And I will call this start travel. And I'll hit compile and save. Back on the travel boat, class settings, I will add our BPI travel vehicle. I will delete this event here for start travel. And I will just double click the interface start travel here. I can now connect it to here. And then if I compile and save, now back on our Interactable, instead of casting, we can just simply do start travel, and you'll see it pops up with our interface. So now, if we try it this time, we should indeed be able to interact with the boat, and then it should mark itself as busy, pick a spline, and hopefully start traveling down it. And I'm going to fall forever and die. There we go. So let's get back up. Come on, Mr. Player. Let's get over to there. Let's remove the blocker by typing the cheat code in. There we go. He'll tell us we're available to travel.
And the path across the waters.
So I will activate the boat. Oh, okay. This is unique. So we're definitely moving. So as you saw, it glitched out pretty badly. All the simple fix is come back into your boat, and where we get the location, just set it to world. So if we start at this time and get into the boat, we should see that it should hopefully rotate to the right position and nicely start. It could be that we need to change the boat's rotation. So if I start it now, so you can see the boat swung sideways, but it is indeed moving and our character's freaking out. So we've still got some stuff we need to fix, but that's completely okay. So firstly, let's figure out why the boat's not rotated correctly. So if I go into travel boats here and click the boat, you can see that the red arrow is typically what Unreal considers as forward. So I'm going to take all of these items here and cut them to add default scene route in, and I'll paste it within it like so. And now I can rotate the boat so the forward boat is 90 degrees and it's facing the correct way. It does, of course, mean that we're going to get a lot of errors. So I'll just fix these errors like so. There we go. Has it all come back? It has. It does, of course, like I say, we need to rotate the boat. That's completely fine. So we'll rotate it now 180 so it fits the right place. It's now in the correct area, so it should hopefully, as you can see, the red line is pointing forwards. The next thing is the player was freaking out. Their physics was not happy. So that's something we can go and fix. So back on where we attach the actor here. Before we attach the actor, I'm going to move it across, and you've got to do this before, otherwise the attach will mess it up. I'm going to drag off the interactor here that we made a variable of. For the interactor, I'm going to drag off and do get component by class. And I'm going to find their character movement component. Because even though it's an interactor, it might not have a character movement component because it doesn't need it unless it's a character. If it does have a valid one, then I will simply set it to disable movement. So this will stop them moving around and glitching out a little bit. It will also hopefully disable the gravity. I'll also get the interactor again over here. I'll do set actor enable collision. And this will basically stop them. If any physics does hit them or anything hits them that should knock them back, it'll be completely ignored. Then we'll attach it to the actor like so. And then hopefully afterwards we can fix it up. So I'll highlight all of this and do disable actor movement / collision. And I'll make sure to just plug the is not valid into the actor collision as well, just in case it's a MP. So let's give it a try this time and see if it works better. So let's go and have a look. So if I come down here now and enable it, we are indeed stuck here. And is the boat moving? The boat is indeed moving, ladies and gentlemen, although very slow and also backwards. So let's speed the boat up because obviously it should go with a bit more oomph than that. We also could do with moving the boat down into the water. So there's little cleanup bits we can do, but that's all good. So for the boat's rotation, in the travel boat, let's set this to the rotation to world and just see if that works any better. I thought it should have been local. That's fine. For the boat speed, let's change it up and say instead of 1,000, let's do 10,000 and we'll see if that works any better. Just remember that instead of setting the speed, you do need to multiply it by the delta seconds. The delta seconds keeps it frames persistent. So if you're on 60 FPS, 30 FPS, 120, it means it won't go faster on 120. It will be the same speed across both, which is exactly what you need. For the camera glitching out, I'm going to ignore that for now because I do plan on actually putting a camera on the boat so you can look at it as it goes around, or keeping the player's camera able to spin around. Either way, you can see the boat is very fast at this point, but the player is there. There's a little glitch with the camera, but like I say, we'll fix that. But the boat is successfully moving around. See, we've got the nice turns as well. I really should have made it so we can control the camera. So we're taking a nice little boat ride, following the player along, watching them go to where they want to go. If I rotate the player around, we can make it a bit more cinematic. We may do that just to make the player nicer. But you can see we've got the travel. You can see the mountains coming. The boat's a little bit big, but that's... Eventually, we will come all the way down. There's still a few things we need to tweak on it, which we will look into in the next tutorial, because this one is getting quite long. But for a basic starter of a boat system, it is coming along very nicely. So you may have one minor bug that if you're using world partition, which if you're doing a semi-open world game, you probably should be, I believe you should be. But if you get into the boat and it's for traveling a set distance, basically world partition won't update that you're on the boat when the player, even though the player's moving, because we've set the player's movement mode to none so they can't move around. So it never actually ticks their transform, and you'll see the boat will just like so. And it'll glitch out, the player will semi-catch up, but it won't work very well. You are supposed to be able to add a streaming world partition source to it. I don't know if it's a 5.3 bug, it's still a fairly new component, but it doesn't work for me. That's supposed to treat the boat as something that can load world partition tiles. Another fix we can do is we can just set the boat to spatially loaded false. This does technically mean if we walk to the other end of the map, the boat is going to sit there active. It won't de-render the model. But we can take care of that later or in a future update if Unreal fixes that component or puts some more documentation out about it, because it's not great. But if we try it now, because the boat is always loaded, we can now get in, get a nice comfy position to watch the boat drive, and we can start it. And you'll see the boat will now travel around the entire spline. I can even break out into the editor if I really want to and watch it. It won't deactivate. Things behind us will deactivate, look, but that's completely fine because that's world partition loading. And you'll see the boat will turn around and it'll come into a nice stop right there. Almost crashing into the mountains, but Elvens are precise, so they miss. So we, of course, do need to work on the height thing here, but we can do that in the next tutorial by adjusting the spline up and down, making it additive to the Z-axis instead of taking over it. But there we go, ladies and gentlemen. There is the starter of a basic boat travel system to go between long-distant areas. In the next tutorial, we're going to start activating more things, so we'll fix the Z height there. We'll make it so the player can get on and off of the boat and then restart the process again if they really want to. And then we'll fix some other things like the camera, we'll add some sounds, and maybe look at making the boat bob up and down on water. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. There is part 1 of our boat travel system. If you've got any changes or things you would like to see on it, please let me know below. If you've got any other tutorials you'd like to see, let me know below because I keep a list of everything I hear. Thank you for watching. I hope this helped. My name is Decryption, and I will see you and Boatyface next time.